I hope everyone is all right this morning and has had a amazing day so far up to this point. I mean, the day is roughly just starting. I mean, it's almost noon. And just starting in the context of not necessarily being evening. I did this video yesterday, so I'm going to keep this one short. I don't necessarily like doing videos twice, but there was a technical difficulty on the last video, and I kind of wanted to get this one out before moving on to the videos I have today. It's like deer in the headlights. I have a hard time moving forward until I finish what I'm supposed to be doing. So in this case, Bernie Sanders. Now, the United States, if I am not mistaken, a quarter of the population is in poverty or around poverty. Half of the population is what you would call, let's say, in not necessarily in the best of economic conditions. And with a record like this, with income inequality soaring, with a homeless population that is in the tens of thousands, and with poverty in the most wealthiest country on the planet, of course, the course of action that the United States needed to take, the most appropriate, was to attack Venezuela. Economic sanctions are the means of attack of the day. This is not just Venezuela, this is also Iran. Now, you can imagine that lefties, on principle, are going to be against this, but not just on principle, just on good common sense. I've never made an argument for Maduro. My argument has been that Venezuela, or the affairs of Venezuela, is not the interests of the United States. And we are taking a predatory role where we're trying to usurp the government of that country, going back to the old coup days that we used to use in South America, putting in dictators. But in this case, trying to put in a patsy that 85% of the population didn't even know who the guy was when the United States started claiming that he was the president of the country. Now, Sanders has been somewhat wishy-washy on this, even though he has been somewhat against this. What do I mean by wishy-washy? He does a two-step. Maduro is a horrible, horrible dictator that needs to have free and fair elections, but we should not be going and instigating coups. This was followed up by a tweet where humanitarian aid that was tried to push forth by Abrams, humanitarian aid that wasn't even accepted by many of the organizations like the Red Cross, wasn't even backing the fact that the United States was pushing humanitarian aid because they understood that this was political ends. If the United States cared so much about the people of Venezuela and wants to relieve the stress that the people of Venezuela are under, just release the sanctions. Giving humanitarian aid is a political stunt. Those organizations understood that. And yet, Bernie Sanders was on Twitter saying that humanitarian aid needed to be led into the country, missing the point that humanitarian aid was being led into the country, just not by countries that was trying to overthrow it and had direct hostile intent like ours. Nevertheless, this is the strongest statement that I've heard Sanders give on this. Now, I want to talk about, after we listen to Sanders' statement, I want to just give a brief reasoning as to why Sanders has been somewhat cagey on this. If you've noticed, AOC has also been cagey on this. When asked about this, AOC has essentially said, I defer to the leadership of the Democratic Party. You can imagine that is a dramatically unsatisfying answer to a bunch of lefties who look at what's taking place in Venezuela as the United States being outright predatory on a nation that we have no business dealing with. Nevertheless, up to this point, Tulsi Gabbard has been giving the most satisfactory answers. Not this two-step nonsense, just we need to stay out, and this is an outright coup. And not just this is an outright coup, how on earth do you plan on getting North Korea to give up its nukes when you're attacking Iran, getting rid of treaties unilaterally, and in this case, screaming at the height of your lungs that you're trying to work for the best interests of the Venezuelans while trying to foment a coup and creating as much havoc in the country as you can? Let's hear Sanders talk about this. Sanders gives an immensely satisfying answer on this question.
You have a right to be what?
And by the way, the question that he's asked, this is Pod Save America, they ask him, do we have to be worried about Donald Trump using some kind of military force in Venezuela? It looks bad. At this point, they're getting desperate. the patsy that they had couldn't seal the deal. Screamed for an uprising, he didn't get an uprising. And it seems like the only real support that he has is from the United States and some of the other Western powers and the patsy nations, as I like to call them. Not within Venezuela. I have a hard time believing that Venezuela wants to go back under the thumb of the United States. I have a hard time believing that. Maduro might be corrupt, but we have corrupt people in our country too. Our government doesn't get toppled because of it. And by the way, the United States had a financial crisis in 2008. There wasn't a superpower kneeling on its throat to prevent it from getting its financial affairs in order. That is literally what is taking place in Venezuela right now. You might call Maduro corrupt, fair enough. You might say that he mismanaged the economy, fair enough. All of those things might be true, but what does that have to do with us preying on the country? Which is exactly what we're doing. Exactly what we're doing. Let's hear Sanders.
Read about anything and everything. Right. The idea, given our history of intervention in country after country in Latin America, the overthrow of Allende, the overthrow of the government of Brazil, Guatemala, other countries, the idea that we would intervene militarily in Venezuela is literally unbelievable. It's beyond, it's absurd. So, yes, I will do everything that I can. And again, this is an issue getting back to the War Powers Act. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure where in the Constitution it says that the President of the United States has the right to send troops to Venezuela or anybody else, anyplace else, without the approval of the United States Congress. And we have got to be very vigorous. You know and I know that it's so easy to send in troops, whether to Iraq or anyplace else, and then you have all of the unintended consequences which take place. So I think our job in Venezuela is to demand international supervision of a free and fair election, to do everything we can to prevent a horrific civil war in that country, not provoke one. So I will do everything I can to see that U.S. troops do not get involved in a civil war in Venezuela.
I like that. He gives historical context. He goes into some of the other leaders that were killed and assassinated. And you must understand the CIA had a brutal, vicious track record in South America. You're talking about killing military leaders of other countries in order to get people in certain positions that would allow them to usurp the government of the country. You're talking about running propaganda campaigns, covertly, of course. Assassinations, bombings in some respects, where the CIA assists one of the other military leaders in bombing the government of a country. I can't remember if it's Venezuela or Chile, but the guy is giving an announcement as he's being bombed. We have a bloody, brutal track record. Not to mention Abrams. They dragged him from under some kind of roach or rat motel in order to be point man on Venezuela. Now, understand who Abrams is. Abrams has a track record. A, he got a convicted line of Congress. And B, the things that he was doing in South America was essentially getting support for dictators, getting support for death squads, kill squads, getting Congress to give money to brutal, vicious dictators, while making this argument that these guys are doing God's work. Like, this guy is a vicious psychopath. He's not put into that position as a fluke of him being a psychopath. He's put into that position because of exactly who he is. It's a feature, it's not a bug, that gives you this kind of notion of what we are doing in that country. And the sad part about it, this is not even like in the old days where a government falls and you're like, holy shit, that government just fell for no reason. Not realizing that the CIA was behind it. There's so much hubris. It's so over the top that they don't even care that you know. And I think that's probably the most terrifying aspect of this. I've always made this analogy. It's like, if my wife fixed me something to eat, I eat it and I say, that's not bad. She pretty much knows that I don't like it. But that's a different matter from me to saying this food sucks. You're conveying the same information, but this food sucks. It's just that much more dramatically so. And that's kind of the way this is. Venezuela. So AOC. the election that's coming up, especially if, and I'll end it on this, especially if it's going to be a Bernie Sanders versus Trump, will be an election that battles out the themes of capitalism versus socialism. Sanders wants to have an election based on policy positions. Now, that's fine and good, but Trump would like to have this based on labels. Labels are a little bit slipperier than policy positions, and you can fill into a label all sorts of things that you can't necessarily get specifically when you get into a policy position. Having an argument about capitalism, socialism matters less than having an argument about whether or not you want Medicare for all. One is a specific policy position. The size of the government is purely determined upon what you need that government to do. This notion of big government or small government is somewhat absurd. What do you need your government to do? What do you require your government to do? And from there, you discern what resources needs to be given for the government to accomplish the task that it needs to do. If your country says, look, we're sick of paying twice as much for healthcare as everywhere else, and we can have a healthcare system that is free at the point of service, then you do that. And you do what you need to do from a governmental standpoint to make that work. Is it socialistic? Yes. But so is the military. So is the fire department. So is the police department. Like, there are all sorts of things. So is Social Security. So is Medicare. But guess what? Medicare and Social Security are dramatically popular because those programs were made to work. They were made to work. My point is this. The themes that are going to be bandied about and thrown about are going to be socialism and capitalism. And the attacks on Venezuela, to some degree, are going to allow Venezuela is a socialistic country. Maduro, being a socialist, caused that country to collapse in the way that it collapsed. Now, mind you, he's not going to add to the fact that the United States strangled the country. He's not going to do that at all. But they will say, though, that Bernie Sanders is a socialist, and that socialist country is akin to what Bernie Sanders wants to do to America. The argument is utterly absurd. Doesn't necessarily mean that's not going to be the argument that he's going to make. Anything that Sanders says backing up Venezuela is going to be used in a campaign ad in order to tie Sanders to Maduro. Sanders is not necessarily insane for being sheepish in the way that he talks about Venezuela, because he's competent enough to know that he is going to be hit with this in the campaign. I don't care. I don't care. Now, my interest in this is slightly different than Sanders. Sanders is trying to run to be president. His concerns are different. My interest is I don't want us preying on that country. We've killed tens of thousands, if I'm not mistaken, 44,000 people up to this point, based on the sanctions that we've implemented. Sanctions are an act of war. Before the Iraq war, meaning before Bush went into Iraq, Clinton put through sanctions that killed 500,000 kids in Iraq. Not being able to get resources, whether it's food, medicine, supplies, sometimes creates the pretext and conditions that kill. In some cases, they're not allowing dialysis supplies to go through. Regardless of what the United States says of, we're allowing medical supplies. Banks doesn't like to do business with Venezuela because they're terrified of the United States government. In which case, things like medical supplies get cut off. That said, I'm glad Sanders came off strong on this. Up to this point, we've only had Tulsi Gabbard. So, shout out to Sanders. Let's see. Who's here? I'll take one or two before I leave. Come on. Natural gas bill. Uh-oh. What is this? Oh, is this the ALC thing? The ALC backed? I heard about this, but I haven't looked too much into this. ALC Tulsi voted yes on pro-fracking bill. See, I need to know what this is, though. I mean, sometimes I'll check this out. I guess this is a question for Nico, right? I mean, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean I don't have access to Tulsi. When Tulsi went on to the Young Turks, there were questions that they posed that she was able to pretty much explain why they did something. I'd be interested to hear why they voted yes on this bill. There may be a reason for it that is just unclear to us. We know that these guys have been pretty heavy on the Green New Deal. It would be odd for them to all of a sudden just abandon the Green New Deal. I don't think she's faking it. But yeah, I'll look into it. Let's see. Jamarl, is it possible to effectively change foreign policy even with a Sanders-esque president? See, that's the question, right? I mean, what I wish they would have asked Sanders there, it's not just, will he do everything that he sees, not to have the Civil War? Okay. But if you're president, will you continue sanctions? That's a question. That's a straightforward, specific question. Because that question gets into this notion of whether Venezuela will be able to reorganize their affairs and get themselves out of crisis. What is your foreign policy towards Syria? Like, do you keep us in Afghanistan? Like, these are fascinating questions. And it gets to this heart of, does your foreign policy, are you able to affect a foreign policy that's dramatically different than what we've had in the previous presidencies under your administration, or for that matter, even under a Tulsi administration? That question I don't have an answer to, but it would be an amazing question to ask, and I've yet to hear Sanders answer that. How does Sanders effectively support the Venezuelan people? What do you mean? I don't understand what you mean. My argument was just that his answer to this was finally somewhat of a clear, definitive statement of his not being for the coup in the first place, and B, making this argument that if he was in the position, this wouldn't go through. Meaning this would in no way have reached this precipice that it's reached under this Trump administration, and that it's somewhat of absurd that we're even here. So that's my position. Pretty obvious that no matter who is president, Israel and Zionists control foreign policy. Control is strong. It's not, I don't think it's as one-to-one as that. Like, I'm not even sure if this is dog or the tail wagging the dog. To some degree, I think it is. But to some degree, the United States has an interest in Israel being in the Middle East. It's our attack dog. It holds a particular space in that region of the world and allow us to essentially attack without our fingerprints being on those attacks. Yes, Israel has its own interests, but the United States also has an interest in the Middle East that Israel sees to. That said, they do have intersection in our politics and in the UK's politics, particularly through APAC, meaning APAC being this kind of conduit that allows money to slush through. He has said he's against intervention. You mean Sanders? It depends on where. It depends on where. He clearly just said he was against intervention in Venezuela. He's come out trying to stop the intervention in Yemen. He's made statements saying that the intervention in Syria doesn't seem illegal. Yeah, I mean, he hasn't necessarily been Tulsi Gabbard, but come on, you have to give him credit to some degree, right? I mean, you can't knock him entirely. All right, I have like a slew of videos that I need to get through today, so I'm going to end this one. And I will see you guys probably in like 10 minutes. There's an amazing article that's just come out showing that they knew all along that the Steele dossier was bogus. They knew it all along. Not just knew it all along. Steele had a mandate to get that dossier out into the public before the election. And one of the people taking testimony knew it and even wrote a letter attesting to such. That was 10 days before they got the FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. They've classified a bunch of that information under national security protocols, which means that to some degree the CIA is implicated in what's taking place because the national security protocols include issues dealing with CIA. It's a fascinating story. So I will see you guys like in a few minutes. Give me about 10 minutes and I'll see you momentarily. Thanks all. Oh, by the way, if you find yourself coming back here often, please consider sharing, liking, subscribing, and if you definitely enjoy the content, you can always help the content out by supporting through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.